And so it's pretty clear that this is not intended to be a phrase that is praising Nimrod or saying that he was in some way favored by the Lord. But as we read through the list of names that come from Ham, we get these 4 names that show up: Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. At least 2 of those names should be relatively familiar right off the bat. Egypt, of course, right? Egypt is still a nation that exists today that has the same name, which is kind of crazy to think about. We've basically had the same name since the flood for this nation. And then we have Canaan. Both of these countries, both of these nations play a very pivotal role in the specific story that Moses is telling. After all, Egypt is the place where all of the children of Israel end up in slavery for over 400 years. It starts with Joseph. Joseph gets sold into slavery down there. He becomes kind of the ruler of Egypt, and then because there's this big famine, he brings the rest of his family down there to help them survive, and he gives them the land of Goshen. And then after a little while, everybody dies in that first generation, and the next generation comes, and we don't want these foreigners being in control. And so everybody kind of forgets about Joseph, and then they start to enslave the people of Israel. And they end up being there for 400 years. And it's as they're coming out of Egypt, as Moses is bringing the people out of Egypt, he is telling them this story again. So Egypt is a really big part of these people's lives, the original audience. And then, of course, Canaan. Canaan is where they're headed. They're headed to the land of Canaan. That's the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey. The land that God has promised Abraham that he would give to them is this land that Canaan inhabits right now. We talked about Canaan some last week, and Canaan's going to come up again throughout the rest of the Old Testament. But after these first initial names, we start to get into the names, the descendants of Cush, and then the sons of Ramah, which is one of Cush's children's. And then it backtracks a little bit and says, Cush fathered Nimrod. And this is kind of a weird deal because Nimrod doesn't show up in the first list of Cush's children. And so again, we have to, why is that? And there's a couple reasons that could be. It could be that Moses is pulling it out and highlighting it as special and not including it in the original list because he wants to make a point about Nimrod specifically. That is an option. Another option, and I think the correct answer here, is that Nimrod isn't Cush's biological son, as in he's not the one that fathered him directly. Because something that we see throughout Scripture, and especially in the genealogies, is that the term father doesn't necessarily refer to direct fathership, as in Denver is my son, but in the same way, but it uses it for grandfather and great-grandfather. So it would say that my dad fathered Denver because Denver is a direct descendant of my dad. And that's what I think is going on here, that Nimrod is a grandchild or maybe even a great-grandchild of Cush. And so it just has this, it's tying Nimrod back to the most prominent ancestor in the list so far. Because Nimrod is an important character in the story. But maybe not in the way that it first appears. Nimrod is important in his own right. He's the first to be a mighty man on the earth. It says he was the first on earth to be a mighty man. And that's an interesting phrase, mighty man. It's the same phrase we read in Genesis chapter 6 when it said that these, that is the Nephilim, were the mighty men who were of old. And this has led some to believe that Nimrod was actually one of the Nephilim. But if we're going to do a word study like that, which is something that I encourage you all to do word studies, they're very helpful. But if we're going to do that, we need to take into account where else is that phrase used. Another place that phrase is used is in 2 Samuel chapter 23, and it talks about David's mighty men. And in that story, they're very clearly not Nephilim, they're just people. In the story of David and his mighty men, the mighty men are kind of like his special warfare unit. They're like his SEAL team. They're his elevated warriors that are able to get the job done. They can do whatever needs doing. They're great warriors. They're very accomplished fighters. And I think that is the way that this is being used here. I don't think it's being used in the same way it's talking about the Nephilim being mighty men. It's just saying that these men are warriors. It's saying that Nimrod is the first warlike individual that appears on the earth. It's not saying he's one of the Nephilim. It's saying that this is a warrior. And I think the text makes this a little bit clear as we get into verse 9. He says he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Again, we got some weird translational stuff here. Because at first glance, it almost seems like this verse 8 and verse 9 are praising Nimrod. Nimrod was the first to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. It almost sounds like he's praising Nimrod. And to make this a little bit more interesting, occasionally for this kind of stuff, I go look up what the contemporary Jewish translation of the Torah says. You can go find that online if you're interested. It's basically like the Jewish English translation of the Hebrew. And the phrase there is translated, he was a mighty hunter by the grace of the Lord. Now, I don't know where they got the word grace in there, but I find that translation really interesting because even more than the ESV, it makes it sound like the text has a positive view of Nimrod here. But I really think that's far from the case. And what was really interesting about the Jewish translation is as I was doing my research, as I was reading, I came across some of the rabbinical tradition, some of the Jewish teaching throughout history on what is going on here. And this is from the I'm absolutely going to butcher the pronunciation of this, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. It has to say this about Nimrod. Nimrod said to his people, "Come, let us build for ourselves, and let us dwell therein, lest we be scattered across the face of the earth, as the first peoples were. Let us build a great tower in its midst, descending to heaven, for the power of the Holy One, blessed be He, is only in the water, and let us make a great name on the earth, as it is said." So Nimrod is basically said to be the one that says, let us build the Tower of Babel so we can make ourselves a god. Because the Holy One, the great God, is only in the water. And we want to be in the sky. And we see this as we continue to look in the text here. It says that Nimrod, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. And again, if we continue to read the story, if we're familiar with chapter 11, we're familiar with the Tower of Babel, we know that the Tower of Babel is not a positive thing in Scripture. It's not like this was a good thing, do this, be like these people. It's very much so that these people tried to be God themselves, and the consequences of that was the scattering of all these people around the world. And so it's pretty clear that this is not intended to be a phrase that is praising Nimrod or saying that he was in some way favored by the Lord. I think Calvin's commentary on this was pretty enlightening. He said, the expression before the Lord seems to me to declare that Nimrod attempted to raise himself above the order of men, just as proud men become transported by vain self-confidence, that they may look down as from the clouds upon others. Wherefore it said, since the verb is in the future tense, it may be thus explained that Nimrod was so mighty and imperious that he would be properly said to be a powerful tyrant, that he is another Nimrod. Yet the version of Jerome is satisfactory, that thence it became a proverb concerning the powerful and the violent, that they were like Nimrod. Nor do I doubt that God intended the first author of Tyrant to be transmitted to such odium by every tongue. Essentially what Calvin and Jerome are saying, or Calvin agreeing with what Jerome said, is that the expression that comes at the end of verse 9, it says, therefore it is said, Nimrod, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord, is a derogatory statement about tyrants. It's kind of like the way that we might today, that you might hear people use the word fascist or communist or dictator. Nimrod is the world's first tyrant. And so we were talking about that phrase, mighty men, and how it could be warrior. It might actually be best to translate that warlord. That he was the first on the earth to be a warlord. And he was a mighty warrior, or a mighty hunter before the Lord. And like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord, became this idiomatic phrase for tyrants. Thank you for watching this clip from Weaver Baptist Church. We hope this message has encouraged you in your faith. We want to remind you that these shortened clips are meant to supplement your spiritual growth, not replace the gathering with the local church body. As Hebrews 10:25 urges us, let us not neglect meeting together to encourage one another. We'd love for you to join us in person at Weaver Baptist Church for the full experience of worship, fellowship, and community. Check our website for service times and directions. If you can't make it, we encourage you to connect with a Bible-believing church in your area. For the complete sermon and more messages, visit our other YouTube channel where the full sermon videos are available. May God bless you, and we hope to see you soon.